Since we're all assembled now, two things: value added. You have two choices today to win a prize. If you vote at all on who's better looking, Jim Johnson or Allison McKee, and they are featured up there on the screen, you will get at no charge an incredible high dollar wooden ruler from the Fowler Law Firm. Well, let me tell you, I'm actually in my office and I want to show you, this is just the most incredible thing. You can use this to, now don't use this on your employees, all right? Because that's a workers' comp claim. But if you can just use this for some of the things we're going to talk about today, a ruler. So that's yours free of charge if you vote on Jim or Allison. And secondly, that just came up just as we were talking here, who, live or fictional, Mr. Bills, forgive me, who has the best backdrop? And well, I'll let Allison give her a little fair warning here as our director of programs, figure out how we're going to display everybody's backdrop. That'll give you something to amuse yourselves with. Importing a backdrop. Call your 12-year-old nephew and he'll help you if you don't know what to do. So if we get to a hard part of this talk, David will answer because he's the smart lawyer. And by the way, David in our law firm of 16 lawyers, and we have two offices in Georgetown at 312 West University. They're both fully staffed and we're totally open. We actually didn't close during coronavirus because we were treated as an essential business. And also in Northwest Austin, near the Arboretum. So we would be delighted to talk to you at any time about anything you like. And if you attended today, and we know if you attended because you had to register with an email, anyone today, and this is very serious, anyone who wants to reach out to us until June the 30th at no charge and talk about whatever you want, we will do that at no charge and it's confidential. And I've got to tell you, a few times when I made that offer, I get these emails at 4 a.m. and I've been calling and it says urgent, must talk to the lawyer immediately. And at 4:05 in the morning, I'm calling them back. And almost always, to me, it was very moving, one, that they'd reach out. And it was also interesting because once we got back their, I don't want to call it pretend question, but their legal question, what I saw is at 4 in the morning, they just wanted somebody to talk to reassure them this is gonna be okay. Now, the things I'm gonna say to you today, certainly I am very influenced in what I say today by the fact that I'm a trial lawyer. I've spent a lot of my career in the courts. I've represented, I do not do labor law. I don't represent workers, but I represent a lot of employers and institutions who have employment disputes. And much of what I'm going to say to you today, because it's all driven by employment. Going back to work is about employment. And finding the money to pay your employees and finding the kindness and strength to support and inspire your employees, and also be a tough guy when they just lose their minds with fear. Fear, I think, is the biggest problem we're going to have to combat this summer, not reality. Fear of the virus, fear of economic downturn, fear of the media, which even though I think most of us are all addicted to it, that can be a terribly frightening thing, regardless of which media outlet you listen to. So today is hopefully about bringing some encouragement. And just this morning, we don't have the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the employment rates, the official ones, until tomorrow morning, but first-time filers for unemployments are down. And that probably is a more reliable indicator of what's going on than anything else. Now, the flip side to this, and this is something that I hope to co-opt every one of you who's an employer into this, is it is already believed that there is going to be significant fraud in unemployment. And there are things you can do. You can't save the whole world from unemployment or the whole United States from unemployment fraud, but there are things you can do to protect your company or your employer and your statistics. And we'll get to all of that. So let me see if this is going to advance. You know, at the Fowler firm, it only takes 4 lawyers and our communications director to make this thing advance. There we go. All right, so there we all are. That is one of the last photos taken before we were all told to socially distance. And in my sadder moments, I pull this up and it makes me so happy because that's the whole Fowler firm. Both, that's actually taken from our Northwest Austin office. We even had dead Fowlers, the ID Fowler, who was the sitting judge up there in Georgetown and Williamson County from 1901 to 1904, who is my husband's, for whom my husband was named, and ID Fowler. They're all on the back row. So you can come to the Fowler firm and meet live lawyers like David, dead lawyers like Judge Penn. What a deal. We don't even charge more for a special viewing of the dead ones. So, okay, what are we going to cover today? And I'm going to lead off on most of these points and then ask for David to contribute. But I want you to understand, if you're wondering what is all this about, it's true. There are some things that you need to think about now if you're running a business, and most of these apply with equal force to nonprofits. This is not just a private small employer talk today. And as you know, nonprofits are equally eligible for most of these grants through the Small Business Administration. Nonprofit charitable corporations got a lot of these grants. But what I do want everyone to think about as we go through each of these slides, I'm 65 years old. I have been licensed 40 years. I have run and managed businesses for 35 of those 40 years, not just a law firm, but a publishing company and certain real estate investments that are active operating investments. And I will tell you this, not one. Also, I did not have the training or combat experience of David, who doesn't want to talk about the fact that he's a decorated combat veteran. So I won't tell him that, David, but David's very modest about his real accomplishments. But I served aboard warships as a naval officer, and I had training about being taken hostage. And all of that is very frightening and very important. And yet, I think in terms of the American people, a dynamic, independent people being basically locked up in their homes and doing it voluntarily, sure, that wasn't great, but the takeaway for me between the industries that turn, big industries that turn on a dime, their manufacturing turned into helping our people survive a completely invisible, unknown enemy we'd never dealt with before. I think that is the most remarkable display of heroism and love on the part of the American people that I have seen in my lifetime. I am prouder to be an American than I've ever been, and I am particularly proud to be a Texan because our state, we had our challenges. You know, we're an intensely international state. We have big ports. We have an enormous international border, and yet we've done things right. We have, if you look every night, I'm not sure why, I go to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and CDC and look at who died. And Texas, considering we're the second most populous community state in the United States, we're usually among the very lowest by the percentages. We're among the lowest for deaths. So there's a lot we've done right because we had all the same dynamics of the states on the East Coast in terms of big ports, big international interaction, and yet it didn't happen. So we are in a great state, and by golly, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a robustness. I just work and go home and fall in a heap now because everybody that was sitting on the couch for for almost 90 days, they've all seem to have conserved their resources, and now they want something, plus people with normal things. And let me tell you this, and I think I love California and think it's a beautiful state that's made a great contribution to our nation, but they're coming here. And the real estate demographics you're seeing, people who have just gone through this are more determined than ever to come to Texas. And all that means more people buying all the things, all the services, all the goods, paying taxes, supporting our nonprofits, supporting our governmental units. I think by September, we're all going to be dancing and screaming hallelujah if we're not worn out from the demand. So today's talk I want everyone to be thinking, let's, as painful and frightening as a lot of this has been, the talk today is designed specifically, not just to give you some tips about coronavirus, but to let everyone you leave here thinking, I've had the toughest test of my system that I have ever had for all of you in your adult running a business or responsible employee. And I'm going to use these challenges to figure out how to make my system better than it's ever been. And I think you better, because I think your next problem come about September is going to be, how can I deal with all this increased demand? I think most of us who are paying attention are going to grow in the third quarter, grow big time. Well, yay. So anyway, all right, first thing, personnel. Now, you don't need to go get your whole, and I'm already seeing, I tell you, every time there's a crisis, the varmints come out of the wall and start trying to sell you stuff that you just can't live without. And golly, is that true now? But you don't need to go change up your entire employee handbook, because what you need, and you got the links there, is you just need to be mindful of what you've got to do. And there's the link to the Workforce Commission and the coronavirus, the special compensation you have to pay workers who are sick. So let me just give you the 30-second crash course on this, because it's a very important takeaway. And I review, a lot of employers turn to me to review their handbooks and would probably pay me a lot of money. And I tell them, for what? This link at the bottom, go to the Texas Workforce Commission, download that template. It's simple. If you took out the spacing, it wouldn't even be 30 pages. Unless you got more than 50 employees, this is adequate to do everything you need to do. You just add your name and import your specific leave policy and whatever contracts you want, and you're there. That's cheap. The last time I do these for people 2 or 3 times a month if they just don't feel comfortable doing it themselves, it took me about an hour to import the detail, to have them have a great employee handbook. And let me tell you why this is better than what Laura Fowler does or your handy dandy. It's all free if you use our policy service or our payroll processing service or whatever. Because if some employee says you're a meanie and your employee policies are not fair, you can hold this employee handbook and say, Your Honor, jury, labor lawyers, Workforce Commission, I use the words adopted by the Texas Workforce Commission current to right now, today. So what's wrong with these policies? This is what the state of Texas told me to do, whether I'm private employer, nonprofit, governmental units. If you don't know what to do, talk to me or somebody like me. Don't perform neurosurgery on yourself for this one, but for nonprofits or private employers under 50, take a look at this. And right now, you know, everybody's expecting some changes. So right now, everything you want to change and improve about your employment situation, do it. And I promise you, you will be in a better place. For one thing, you'll have a book, you understand the words in it. Believe you me, you go over there to the courthouse with some of these books some of you got. The judge is not an employment specialist typically. The jury certainly is. And if you got some words in a book everybody can read, then they're going to think, yeah, the employee should have read and understood that and done it, as opposed to these complicated, convoluted dissertations on life, which is what a lot of these books needlessly are. And I blame lawyers for doing that, and I blame some of these national services that sell all this stuff. Ooh, I got me a 4-inch handbook here, free, because I'm using some other service. Well, what you got is a snake in a book that's going to come out and strike you, the employer. Okay, all right. So your first question, whatever you've got now, and in Texas, 2 things to remember. You don't have to have employee policies. You don't have to have employee contracts. But if you don't have something, there are a whole series of defaults that are going to be supplied by the law, and they're not necessarily what you as an employer want. So And the last thing I want to tell you, please, unless you have some contract for a period of months or years with someone, make your employee contracts at will. It beats anything I've ever seen how so many wonderful people come to us and they just adopted something they pulled off the internet. And yet you see many hospitals, universities, brilliant people who are making several $100,000 a year. They don't care if they're at will. They want a high salary and they want the goodies and maybe a golden parachute, but you can get rid of them. Because even with someone who's not that highly compensated, if you don't have at-will employment, which is your right in Texas, to just tell them, not give them a reason. At-will means you just say, it is no longer in the best interest of my company or nonprofit to employ you. Sit down, shut up. And of course, when you say that to them, then they come back and say, I've got a right to a reason. I got a right. No, they don't. That's what I do. I mean, thank the Lord we have such a great team. I only have that conversation about once every 5 years, but that's exactly what we do. Because nobody ever kissed you on the lips, my friends, as the employers for saying, well, I'll tell you why, because you're the biggest screw up in the history of this company. Nobody says, thank you for telling me that. Never. At-will employment gives you the right to give no reason and move on. That is always best. And I say that as somebody who's tried cases in the courts for many, many years. So as you move forward, now you can't take away something from somebody unless they consent to it. But right now we're also going to talk at a later point about how to keep people from stealing your stuff. The biggest theft I see going on is not people beating in the windows and looting. It's people who work for you that walk right out and start competing against you, stealing your great ideas, stealing your trade secrets, stealing your procedures, stealing your brand. Is there anything you can do about that? No, if you don't make them behave when you give them a job. But you can do powerful things. This idea that non-competes aren't enforceable, they are enforceable, my friends. And if you spend a year or two training somebody, and I'm speaking to you now as an employer, I employ this law firm, Dave and I employ 26 people. Nobody, no matter how brilliant they are, learns it all the first day. It takes some time. Why should you pay them for all that startup time? Then they just walk out like a grinning cheetah and start competing against you. And yet, Texas is free market. And that's exactly what they have the right to do, unless you put in a non-compete, a non-solicitation, and the biggest of all, and by far the most powerful, a non-disclosure. Those of you, and I'll get off this sermon, this may be the most powerful takeaway I'm giving you, but this is important. The same among you that if somebody, the employee came in the middle of the night and stole all the office furniture, they leave and they take all of your office furniture with them, you'd call the sheriff. But that's nothing compared to if they walk out of there with your trade secrets, your successful ways to generate business, marketing, and client development. That's what most modern businesses, that's their most important asset. And yet we let these people walk away. Don't do that. Time to have a new contract with everyone. A new day is dawning. You will love them. You will protect them. You will give them a job before anyone else has hitched up their shorts and started back to work. But you deserve their loyalty. And if they cannot stand you anymore, they don't get to steal your other employees. They don't get to steal your great ideas. And they don't get to compete against you. And if these and this doesn't need to be some 15-page magnum opus, 2 or 3 pages of that locked into their employment contract, written correctly and written simply so everybody can understand it, and written so it's only about what you do. You know, if you're running the local pizza parlor and you figure out the great way to cook pizzas that nobody ever cooked before and then deliver them quickly, that you can't stop them from going out and playing the cello. You gotta try it. So it is limited to what your business does or realistically will do in the future. That's a long talk, but if you just turn off right now because you got to go order lunch or change or write some new employment contracts with non-competes, non-solicitation, and non-disclosure, I respect you because I have just delivered you the keys to the kingdom. And you know, everyone's in love with everyone when you're just getting employed. They'll do anything when you're just offering them a job, especially right now. So do this right now. Say to yourself, I'm going to do this, because let me tell you, nobody's going to say no. They're so eager to get your job, they're not even going to read it. Now, you want to be fair about it, because if you aren't fair, the courts aren't going to enforce it. But if you write these right, and you write these legally, non-disclosure, non-solicitation, and non-compete, a court will enforce it, easily enforce it, and even treat the actions by the employee, the departing employee, as criminal. So, all right, do you have your poster up, boys and girls? This poster, and a lot of you did not have any team on board by March the 27th, but a cyber poster or this poster, you need to give it to them. Now, again, you don't need to rewrite some policy. People call me up and say, Laura, you write me a correct. I said, for what? Print the poster. It's actually, you know, like coronavirus, I'll give it that. It's nicely color themed to monochromatic shades of red and burnt orange. But this thing is readable, understandable. Don't make a decision. If somebody calls up and says, I don't want to come back because I'm taking care of grandma, so I fit under this paid leave act. Well, that may be true. I don't know. I'm not going to answer those questions now, because tiny changes in your facts make a huge difference. Workforce Commission has expanded the entitlement to continue to collect unemployment until the end of the year for certain of these categories. So don't make a mistake about this one. Get the link. You've got it right there. That's the U.S. Department of Labor, and I'm of the professional opinion. Labor did a good job writing this in simple terms everyone can understand. But if you're above 50 employees, or you for some reason decided to elect Family Medical Leave Act type benefits, even if you're under 50, at 50 you have to have them. This is complicated, and not paying a worker leave is like not paying a worker wages. The U.S. Department of Labor will have a right to chomp on you if you make this mistake, and their right to impose a penalty, not that the worker gets, but that the U.S. Department of Labor gets. That's an unfunded mandate, if I ever heard one, is $1,200 per worker per week. Now, it doesn't take that much time or money to get a lawyer who understands these things to tell you what to do if you're not sure. But be certain you understand your duties under coronavirus. But the last takeaway here for those of the accounting persuasion, another thing, everything I'm saying today, I hope and pray you get a great CPA. I don't drink or use any drugs. I just employ CPAs. It keeps me calm. It's just the wonderful CPAs I employ. I am not one myself. The CPAs I employ always make me more money than I pay them. What do I care what they cost? But CPAs understand this highlighted point, and this is important. If somebody calls you up and says, I got to stay home with grandma, so employer, you give me some more of that paid leave, even if they've exhausted the leave that you agreed to give them. Oh, and by the way, do we all know in Texas, for private employers, unless you're under a collective bargaining agreement or something, some of you are, you don't have any duty to give anybody any leave. So the leave you give them is your largesse. But you now do have a duty to pay them leave if they fit into one of these coronavirus categories. But guess what? And this is important for nonprofits too. If you say to a nonprofit, oh, you get a tax deduction, that means nothing to them. But this is not federal income tax deduction at all. It is federal, but it is a payroll tax deduction. Now, you're not the CPA, you're the employer just trying to keep track of the sick leave. But be sure, whoever is coding your books, anything you give because of coronavirus, you need to code it so then you can take a deduction which is taken against your payroll tax. So how you set that up so you get to take that, that's what I want you to talk with your employers about. But that's a big deal. Because if you look at how generous this workforce commission employment business is and the reasons they don't have to come back. Now, it's not your problem. If they haven't come back, they're drawing workforce commission. But if you look at it, it's pretty much word for word the same entitlements in this employee rights sick leave. If they take paid sick leave that you have a duty to pay them, then you get this deduction dollar for dollar against your payroll tax credit. So mark it and then go talk to your CPA. And I don't know if you have to take that within the quarter or the end of the year. That's why we have great CPAs, because I don't know. So, oh yes, and of course, I have a lot of clients who are contractors, construction contracts, and they actually don't have any employees. I also have clients like real estate brokers. They have lots and lots of people running around, but they're all 1099 contractors. This stuff and unemployment for the first time is applying to contractors, but that's not your problem. And coronavirus is not. Coronavirus entitlements only are an obligation on the employer to pay his W-2 employee. Very, very important. There are a lot of different parallel universes revolving. Okay, there you go. Here are the things, and this is hot off the press from the Workforce Commission. But I just want to say this, and now I'm going to state my one. I never state a political bias or advocate faith in a presentation like this. That's not appropriate. But I am going to state one thing that is my deeply held secular conviction. I think people who can work should work. And I think being idle, you know, that old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. Sitting on the couch when you can go to work is just plain evil. And you as the employer can't make anyone come back to work. They can only come back to work themselves, but you can certainly incentivize it for them. And here's what I urge you to do. Now, if they go over there to workforce and they file for unemployment and they get approved, they're not approved forever. They have to continue to apply and reapply and make certain attestations. The minute you make them an offer to return, not necessarily at 100% of what they were offered before, but to return, and this you have to, unfortunately, now let me just say this, I liked Workforce Commission, and I felt their technical support people, their help desk were actually very helpful to employers, not in the adversarial part, but in the just call up and get some help before the coronavirus challenge. Now they're still having a lot of problems technically and just the sheer volume, which neither they in Texas nor any other state agency I read about was prepared for this. But you need to, the minute you tender an offer, at some point, if your offer is very, very low, that it meets the definition of part-time employment, this won't work. But most of us are looking at, okay, we let some people go because we just didn't have any work, and now we're in a position to offer people a job. The same day you write them the offer, do not just pick up the phone. Picking up the phone's good, but you give them a written offer. It could be an email, but you get them a written offer that you can prove they got, and you call them and you write down that you called them. And the same day, ladies and gentlemen, you send a notice to Texas Workforce Commission that you have sent Jim Johnson an offer to return to full duties or return to a job with X amount of pay, indefinite in time and performance. That will stop your individual risk history from running up. Now, nobody knows on this broadcast today how the state of Texas is going to decide the rate for unemployment, which they have the right to set and reset. You know, as we know, oil industry, for example, we all know the oil industry employers, that rate's going to go up. That had nothing to do with coronavirus. That had to do with an industry. But when you have something like this, which really has not occurred in the United States before, even the so-called recession, the TARP recession that began about 2009. And by the way, I just saw a statistic this morning, TARP in Texas, the mortgage recession, had almost as high an unemployment rate as Texas as of this morning in terms of applications And that went on for 2.5 years. So we've seen this industry specific, industry and associated enterprise before. We've never had a systemic artificial closure like this before. So we're all in uncharted waters here, but it doesn't take you any more time to send a letter, and please send it certified. Don't just email somebody at the Workforce Commission. Don't just submit to that portal. The portal, their data submission portal is having a lot of problems. Okay. Couple of things. If you're running, you may have H-2B, H-2A workers. You may have H-1B skilled workers. High tech let go a lot of people. Now they're starting to hire them back. But let's be sympathetic to these people, because many of them, they came to school here at the University of Texas. They loved Austin, Texas State University. They loved it. They stayed. They've never been back to their country of origin since they were 17, 18 years old. If they don't figure out what to do in 2 months from whenever they got laid off, they may go back to a country where they have no friends and no family. So I really encourage you, for the people who are already here, let's try and help them and be sympathetic. Now they can convert to a tourist visa. Our firm has an employer immigration law section. We help a lot of people in high tech and medicine and the universities, educational people, brilliant people, people who really, and some performing artists too. And those people, a lot of people who come to the universities, they're in a world of hurt if they don't find something else to do. Now, if you're in that situation as the employer, don't just start being a gratuitous good guy. It all starts with their visa. I can sit here all day long and tell you everything about H-1B skilled worker visas, and you still won't know anything until you say to that worker, bring me the most current visa. Let me see what it says. And then try to get them piggybacked. At worst, the worst choice, but it's better than nothing, is to be a tourist visa. Because on a tourist visa, they can't get paid, but at least they don't get exported back to their country they may have no involvement with. So that's a biggie. But I hope our high tech and healthcare industries, a lot of these people are in healthcare, and a lot of people don't understand healthcare really took a gigantic hit for everything that wasn't coronavirus. That's getting better again, but okay. We are almost running out of time here, so let me just run through this very, very quickly. Getting back to the friendly wolves. Now, some of these wolves aren't too smart, and I'll just tell you as a law firm, if you call up our office, we answer, the Fowler Law Firm. How may I help you? Well, if I were a wolf or a thief, I would kind of think that's my least likely choice to try and defraud. But the number of fake people calling up our law firm, because we were still answering the firm. I'm proud of the phone. I'm proud that we actually had live reception service throughout all of this. And people who were fake collectors, fake law enforcement, fake FBI, fake Department of Public Safety, were calling up and telling us if we just needed to make a payment right now, or blah, blah, blah was going to happen to us. And it was all fake. And there are people running around now selling fake stuff, and they are evil. That's just stealing. But because fake stuff in the form of a contract that they get you to sign, and then you pay, and then you realize it's nothing, that's kind of white collar crime. And law enforcement is not, when you call them up and say, they just came in and broke the windows out and stole everything in my lobby, law enforcement is going to come out. They say, I was just such a doofus that I signed this contract. They took all my money and now they're not doing what they promised. Try getting the county sheriff to come out for that one. Good luck. I got too much to do. All right, but I will talk to anyone, because we're running out of time, and I promised I'd quit at 10:45. And then we let David answer all the hard questions you asked. But take this, and for every one of these, if you will just vote on who's better looking, Jim or Allison, or tell us who your favorite backdrop is, either one, I will also send you the answer to these questions, because these are very, very important, and you don't even need the answer. The next time somebody, fake or real, because remember, unfortunately, there's some people that weren't in that great a shape to begin with, and they definitely, coronavirus pushed them over the edge. They are gonna go under. Now, if you do business with somebody who isn't real, who isn't solvent, who's got tax liens up to their ears, the best time to know that is before you give them their next contract, okay? And here are the links to do it. Also, best not to do business with sexual perverts and predators. That's kind of one of my deeply held convictions. So people who are broke, people who have the IRS after them, people who are perverts. Now, I will say there are some people convicted of felonies that have a remarkable spiritual conversion, and then they turn out to be wonderful, wonderful people. So all of this, you got to put a governor on it, but proceed with knowledge. I'm not saying don't hire the pervert, don't hire the convicted felon, don't hire the guy or gal with IRS liens up to his ears. But I am saying know it before you sign the contract. To do all these searches I just put in front of you takes you, once you familiarize yourself with these systems, about a minute and a half. For a $100,000 contract that's going to bind you for 5 years, do you have a minute and a half to find this out before you sign the contract, cut that first check? Of course you do. Another thing, very, very important. Again, I will talk to you all day long about the Big 10 here. But I beg you, especially as we get back into trying to get things done quickly, a lot of us need people, you know, if somebody kicked out the windows of your storefront, you don't need it 6 months from now, you need it now. Drop dead dates and delay damages. If you get a contractor out there and they suddenly find, a lot of our contractors, Home Builders Association is one of our, we're very proud as a firm to represent them and a lot of the skilled trades. And I am thrilled to see my guys and gals calling up saying, I got so much work, I don't know what I'm going to do. But if you need remodeling now, if you need a high-tech program, software program, you need to put in drop dead dates and delay damages. Don't call them punitive, but drop dead dates and delay damages are when a contractor who's now got abundance, he's got more work than he knows what to do with it. He said, oh, that John Bills, he put in that stinger, but I'm going to go do his work first, because if I don't do his work first, the consequences are a lot greater than that nice Allison, but I'll still vote for Allison as the best looking, okay? So everybody gets something, but these stingers that you do not call punitive, you call them drop dead dates and delay damages, they work. I have enforced those for multi-million dollar, I never called them penalties. I called them glowing narratives of the great damage and sorrow and grief imposed because the provider or contractor did not finish when he was supposed to. So you get creative about that, because a drop dead date is a very powerful tool. All right, we're coming into the, okay, now some of us, let's be honest, we were really frightened. So we went to the HEB and paid for our food, because the last time I checked, you don't get to walk out of HEB until you pay them money. But some of you may have put off continuing education and the renewal of your license. Every one of these licensing agencies has postponed some of this, some of them till the end of the summer. But if you employ anyone or you sell a service, whether it's an independent contractor under you or an employee, if you employ these people, if you contract with these people and they have to have a license to do whatever it is, installing a septic tank, operating a backhoe, selling food, selling alcoholic beverages, before you open the doors the first day, you need to check. They don't have to do anything. Every bit of this is electronic. But whoever it is you're hiring, you need to check. And if you're buying insurance, if you're buying real estate, if you're buying law firm services, CPA services, you go to their licensing board and you check. Are they licensed or in the state of suspension? I don't mind telling you in the good times, whenever anybody brings me a file because they want me to sue old Joe because Joe didn't do them right, before they come in for the first talk, I have already scrutinized old Joe if he's got a license. And I'd say about a third of the time, if you got a deal where you got multiple licensees in the mix, about a third of those situations, they aren't current on their licenses, they aren't current on their filings. Something is wrong. And why I'm doing that as a trial lawyer is because I go over there to the courthouse and only find out then. It is very difficult to hold people accountable. And okay, I'm trying to scare you now. I haven't talked about many scary things today because this was our hope-filled talk. But I want everyone to take a deep breath and then scream, because licensed people who aren't licensed subject you to criminal consequences. If you need a locksmith to fix the doors that just got broken down, you have to have a licensed, a DPS licensed person, or you violate both state code and you violate most city building codes. And then guess what? You go from being negligent, which is often with premise defect being so limited, you don't have much liability. You go to being the insurer of that wrongdoing. Everything everybody does for you, you are then the insurer of it. And Texas law is not that way. Plus, if you get charged, and you will, with a criminal misdemeanor, then you have to tell your insurance company and the premium goes up. So don't do that. Okay, no time for brand today. I love to talk about brand, but whatever marks you just got your heart set on, file them. It's cheap. Most people as smart as the ones we got listening today, Allison. But Allison, I want to compliment you. You got a particularly smart group enrolled here today. Go play with these links. You can figure it out yourself. If you get stuck, you can call one of us, but protect your brands. Okay, planning to die. I guess if you're at this webinar today, you're not dead yet, but make sure your business agreement has an owner succession plan. Thank the Lord, I didn't have to deal with this. David, who is a wonderful, wonderful estate planning lawyer, actually goes and makes sick calls, house calls, and hospice calls. And we did not get called to help anyone during this challenge. For one reason, we weren't permitted into these facilities. But the time to be trying to call your banker and say, hey, I want somebody else in my workplace to have access to the accounts, the line of credit, whatever, is not when you got a ventilator crammed down your throat. That's not going to work no matter how friendly your banker is. So have a plan. This takes 5 minutes to change in your operating agreement. So somebody other than just Big Daddy, if that's who you are, or Big Mama, has the power to run your business if you get sick. And the only thing I want to say about personal estate planning, many of you, if you're a small business owner, this is certainly true of David and me, your wealth is tied up in your business. Consequently, if your will isn't consistent with your business plan, your operating agreement, that operating agreement that typically addresses your partners, unless your spouse is your partner or your children, that operating agreement preempts any conflicting terms in your will. So you may have the very undesirable situation of you're dead or incompetent, and here comes somebody like your beloved nephew to run your partner. If your partner gets sick, suddenly his nephew, who you didn't much care for, is up there trying to run your business with you. Okay, last thing, and then I'm going to quit because I'm out of time. Please, I think even if we go back to work, even if we have 100% of what we had before on the payroll, I think we're going to do a lot of things differently. And one thing, people like this delivery. If you're in delivery of services, if you're doing more things at people's houses or offices, likely you're not going to go out and buy a new fleet of trucks. For a while, you're going to ask people to use their personal vehicles. Takeaway, second most important takeaway, after what I said in the beginning about non-competes and non-disclosures, if you ask an employee to drive their car, a car your business does not own, if you, in the business you own, drive your personal automobile that your business does not own, do not drive until you've made one 5-minute call to your auto insurer and say, Mr. Insurer, I'm now driving my personal vehicle, and you tell your employees to do the same thing. Employee, call your personal auto liability insurer and tell them I'm driving my car 20% of the time to do my employer's work. And unless they're hauling animals or explosives or booze, that's probably not going to be a problem. But it is going to be a big problem if they get in a wreck, and the first person to the wreck is going to be the law enforcement. They're going to say, were you working in the scope and course when this accident happened? And then the next call is going to be their perky insurance company. And they're going to say, you working in the scope and course. And the insurance companies in Texas. Now, if you got a fleet in another state, I don't know what it's like there, but Texas Department of Insurance is very clear that an insurer of personal auto liability insurance written on someone's personally owned auto as opposed to business owned auto has the absolute right, even if your worker is all paid up on his personal auto, to decline to cover that accident if it was done in the scope and course. And since you may not have liability insurance drop down, you just need to talk to an insurance agent who knows what they're doing. A business insurance agency will know all about this. And you buy drop down auto that piggybacks on top of whatever the individual has, and make the individual declare the amount he's driving his car for you, and you're fine. Usually it doesn't even cost you more money, but you've got to do this. So, okay. All right. Bonus. Find a banker you love. That's going to be the next talk. New friends, all of whom hopefully are members of the chamber. I only talk about wonderful people who are members of the Georgetown Chamber. And the Georgetown Chamber's got some wonderful banks that are community banks, and community banks prove to be the heroes. Insurance policies. There are great insurance agencies that are a member of the chamber that have exceptional skill. Georgetown is a community, maybe small, but the skill set of all of you, just everybody's up there because they love it so much. So find an insurance agency that's local, that cares about you, and there are plenty of them that understands business insurance, and you will have a wonderful friend. Nobody charges money to give you a quote. Finally, my personal favorite, this is the CPA to whom the Fowler Law Firm turns for all its challenges. Seriously, CPAs, I've already said it and I'll say it again, they're really incredibly valuable to your business. I feel so strongly about that. When a startup comes to me and says, Laura, will you be my lawyer? I say, who's your CPA? And if they don't have one, I tell them, when you get a CPA, you come back and I will love you. But you cannot run a business. If you got one half of one employee, you need a CPA. It's just too complicated. So, all right, returning to the most important thing of all, and you all already know this if you're at this webinar, join and be active. I have missed my friends so much, flesh and blood friends. As attractive as you all look in this two-dimensional image right there, by golly, I just wish I could hug you and walk around the class today and touch you and give you my incredible high-dollar ruler for real. But someday soon we'll do that again. But for now, if you don't join the chamber, Jim and Allison figured out a way. You are glued to this webinar and you can't get away from the webinar. It's like locking the door. That's what I do. Till you join the chamber, your computer won't be released to go do your day's work. So join the chamber if you haven't, because it's a remarkable outpouring, not just of business information, but fellowship and wonderful friendship. I just love every time I have an interaction. So I'm done. Everybody got a question? Ask away.
Laura, we did have a question that came in, and it was about going back to work, the challenges of bringing people back into the office. There may be circumstances where you offer someone their job back or bring them back on, and they would like to continue working from home or begin working from home rather than coming into the office.
Okay.
You speak to, and the employer really needs them in the office. Could you speak to how, the issues dealing with that?
Yes, I will. Thank you, David. And this is, now again, this has nothing to do with unemployment. This is someone who is still employed by you. And you got to, and I would, most things today I told you can do yourself. You don't need to blow a bunch of money on lawyers. This one, you probably need to get some help. But when you have that question posed, and this is probably what David just, the question our attendee just presented. This to me is probably the most complicated tango of anything you're going to do as an employer. First, you have to identify, are they employed as a W-2, not a 1099? And that can get confusing. All right. Then you look at what are their rights? What are their earned leave rights? Now they got 2 weeks of sick leave, Corona sick leave, for which if you look down there at the bottom, they get, you as an employer get dollar for dollar credit. And I know your question is, I really need them. It doesn't work for me for them to be at their home. All right, but wages aside, and I can't overstate the importance of wages because leave is wages. Unpaid leave subjects you to the same penalty as unpaid wages, and they're horrific. They're more frightening to me than workers' comp, and they're more complicated. All right, so once you look at all the leave they've earned, because if you gave them leave or coronavirus, Families First Coronavirus Response Act gave them leave, up to 2 weeks leave, then the leave they've earned on the books, then you get into this limbo of other possible leaves they may be entitled to. They are entitled, and I'm not going to be coaching your employees, and you shouldn't be either. But the first thing is, I can't come back to work because I got coronavirus or my grandmother's got coronavirus. You should demand proof that you're right. Forget coronavirus for a minute. If they call up and say, I can't come to work because I broke my leg and your company's heavy construction, you would have a right every day, every week to certify for them to get leave. Most of you have rules that if they're out more than 3 days, they have to produce medical evidence that they have whatever they say is limiting them from doing whatever it is they want to do. So that's the first thing, is affirmation that whatever they're saying is true. Now, at the point they say, I can't come back, I don't mean to sound hard-hearted. And I tell you right now, there have been times late at night when I have been talking to the deity of my choice, because this situation the last 2.5 months scared me to death. But being afraid, the last time I checked, the U.S. Department of Labor is not a regulation that entitles you to stay at the house. I am afraid and I don't want to, don't work. So then you get into, is anything about their condition something that they meet the definition of disability? And that's where you probably need to get some legal help, because you don't want to just be crawling along in this talk with them over the phone that they are recording because possibly their labor lawyer told them to record it, and you make a misstep. And I think it is better when you get to the dialogue of, I'm afraid, I'm not coming back. I think it's better to be exchanging information in writing, because I'm sorry they're afraid. We're all afraid. Life is frightening from the minute you're born. But I'm afraid won't work. But if they then say, well, I have anxiety disorder. Well, don't make light of that. If whatever their condition is meets the medical definition of anxiety disorder, that is no different than somebody who broke their leg. All of you are governed, if you have 1 employee or 50, you are governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And at the point, either by design or just because their facts really do lend it to a mental or physical disability sufficient that they are entitled to, and listen to this now, see, this is complicated. The next trigger is whatever their problem is, does it meet the definition of disability? Do not move forward until you're satisfied it meets, one, they have that. So again, they say, you never heard about separation anxiety before. You say, I got to have some medical evidence of that. You being afraid is not separation anxiety. In fact, I submit, if there's anyone there who didn't feel any fear this last 6 months, last 3 months, there's something wrong with you. We were all fearful some, but fearful to the level that it meets a medical disability, that is eminently confirmable. So they present that. Then you go to the next step. Once they present this and they say, I want to stay working for you, but I can't work at work. the burden shifts to you. At that point, you need to evaluate. And this is not, this idea they all get to stay at the house because they're afraid. You can forget that. And I'm speaking to you boldly because I think I see employers with huge hearts who are very, very kind that think it's bad to stand up to people. People saying, I'm just going to stay at the house because I'm afraid. You need to evaluate. And this is not going to be one size fits all. If you're doing heavy construction, sitting at the house, if they're a construction worker, that's not going to work. If you're a real estate broker and they're a research person for you, a title company, where you got research people and you got closers. Actually, that's not a good example because so many of these talented title companies, they've shifted over to all electronic closings. But somebody who really can do back office functions that are largely communication driven and are data digitally driven and are not supervising anyone, maybe. But remember, the accommodation is once you establish they do have a legitimate, now not every disorder meets the definition under 504, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Not every disability meets that definition. But once they do have something that meets that definition, you may want to get some help on that one. Then the next step is, in light of the unique and reasonable expectations of your workplace, can you make a reasonable accommodation? Reasonable accommodation is not what they want. It's reasonable based on the facts as a whole, reasonable to others. And I would stand up because let me tell you, it's a slippery slope. If you got one employee, you got more latitude than if you got 50. But if you just, your heart goes out to the first one, and really what their problem is they're afraid. They are irrationally afraid. They probably don't meet the definition of a mental or physical disorder. And they probably, for most of us, we need our people working with us. And at that point, if you can't make a reasonable accommodation, you tell them in writing. You need to tell them why. That would be something you get some lawyers to tell you why. But you just come up with what's not reasonable about sitting at the house. And then you tell them, so you need to come back to work, or you may discharge them at that point, or you may tell them your work was so good before, when and if you want to come back to work, we'll give you a favorable consideration. And that's all up to you. You're in control. Rejoice in the fact that in Texas, you are an at-will employer and you are in control. Now, good point about that. Everything I just said, based on David's recital of our attendees' question, depends upon and presumes that you have an at-will employment relationship. If you have committed to, as some of our very large employers have, incredibly generous packages, and nothing I said is true if the employer has afforded them more. And when somebody calls me up privately, the first thing I say is, I heard all that great stuff you said about at-will employment. And I always tell them, well, forget that. Send me your contract with this employee and send me your employee handbook and benefits package, because you don't know anything until you look at that. So whoever of our attendees, that was a great question. Maybe the most important one. Thank you, David. Anything else? We're out of time. I could just talk to y'all all day. This is just, are we happy now? I mean, I just think everything is so much better than it was. Our last webinar was about 5 weeks ago with Georgetown Chamber, and we were all trying to show a bright face, but it was a lot harder then. Things are happier now. Anybody else, or do we need to? Is our adventure at an end? All right, remember to vote for Allison and Jim. Who's the best looking? Remember to send in who's got the best backdrop. Remember, if you send us an email, you get an incredible high dollar ruler with which to read your contracts and the answers to the contract questions. And Allison, I believe you're going to send them this PowerPoint, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it's all in there. And remember, the incredible offer of the Fowler Firm is anyone, if we see your email address, which we will, and you have attended this, which your email address registration shows you attended this, you are entitled to one unlimited conference at no charge about any topic. Everything from political free speech. Jim, we got to do that one in the fall. That's going to be a hot one. Political free speech to coronavirus, to Americans with Disabilities Act. We're here and we'd love to talk to you. And you will not get hounded with emails or anything. So, our
All right. Well, Laura and David, thank you both for being here today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another Chamber U. Next Tuesday, correct? Is that correct, Allison? Tuesday, we are doing a free chamber event with the Vice President of the United States Chamber of Commerce.
Wow.
To discuss the Treasury's information on if you took a PPP loan and what forgiveness for that actually looks like. So that is another opportunity for you guys to continue to stay connected with our organization. Phase 3 of the governor's order did come out yesterday. We are in the process of reviewing some of that information so that we have a better idea of chamber events and if they have now been cleared. We're kind of flipping a coin right now, so we'll let you guys know pretty soon what our interpretation of that is. Also, we haven't even sent an email out about this, but for the remaining people, Thursday, June 18th at 9 a.m., the Chamber will be doing a virtual cornerstone event featuring Scott McClellan. And you might question who Scott McClellan is. The name might not ring a bell, but Scott is the president of HEB Food and Drugs over the entire corporation. If you've seen any of those HEB commercials, that is Scott that you are seeing in those commercials. And he will focus on HEB's efforts in economic development and education with some specific ties to their efforts with COVID-19. So it should be a fantastic program. Expect an email later today with more information. Guys, again, thank y'all for joining us, Laura and David. It is absolutely a pleasure to have you guys as always. Stay safe, and hope to see everybody very soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Allison.
Bye, guys.
Bye.